Part 3, and hopefully the last one. Something like that. Mark fought back the tears. If the neighborhood wanted... no. The burst has been a huge tragedy for so many people, but to me it's been a godsend. I get to see my grandbabies every day and spend time with my daughter. Gunny and Abby have become great friends to Alice and me, and I've gotten to work in the soil again. I couldn't have asked for more. Mark fought back the tears. If the neighborhood wanted a John Wayne, here he was. Mark wished he had half the courage of this man. George, your secret is safe with me. If you need anything else, just let me know. He put his hand on the man's shoulder and squeezed gently. I want you to take this. I've written down everything I can think of that you might need to know about farming. It's all in here. Hope it's useful. Mark took the notebook and hugged it to him. Thank you, George. It'll be really useful. This will keep us going when those who aren't as fortunate have nothing to eat. This is the greatest gift anyone could give us. As hard as he tried not to cry, he felt a tear roll down his cheek. Enough of that, George scolded. Don't make me sorry I told you. Yes, sir. They looked over the other crops in the field. George took great pride in pointing out how well they were doing. After a while, Mark headed back to his study and put George's notebook in his fireproof gun safe. A few minutes later, Gunny, Jim, Ralph, and Mark were on their way to the sheriff's meeting. When the meeting started, there was still some argument about the need for a militia for the county. The same loudmouth from the week before was the main opposition to the plan. However, most of the citizens felt a trained force would be beneficial. Many brought lists of people who had volunteered to help. The lists totaled over 600. Others estimated there were at least that many more who would also sign up. The sheriff informed everyone that they would try to have a training scheduled by next Monday. Kurt told of a few things he'd picked up on over the last week about how order was rapidly disintegrating in most of the medium to large cities. He asked Mark if he would share what his group had seen during their travels of the last week. Mark noticed that everyone was listening intently to his description of the 2 trips they'd taken. Most nodded their heads grimly at the confirmation of lawlessness and anarchy that the outside world had become. Others were shocked at some of the images he painted, even though he whitewashed them to a degree. When Mark was finished, he answered a few clarifying questions and sat down. The doctor got up and talked a little, but he basically had no new information for the group. When he was done, the meeting was adjourned until next week. Kurt asked the same small group to meet in his office. Mark excused himself for a minute and talked to the doctor about George's meds. He was more than happy to help and told Mark to come by the hospital later. Mark asked if he could come tomorrow when he didn't have anyone with him. Dr. Ken smiled and said that would be fine. When Mark got to the sheriff's office, options were being discussed for training the 1,000 to 1,200 volunteers. This was more than anyone had expected, and they didn't know how to train so many. Just need a green beret. Let alone transport them back and forth. It was decided after considerable discussion to bring in 2 people from each group and train them to train the others. Gunny, Rob, Kurt, Jim, and Mark would do the initial training. Then, perhaps later, they could bring in a few of the better groups in for some special training. With that settled, the men headed outside. We'll help you load the Harley up, Rob offered. We want you to have it, Mark told him. I can't accept something like that. Yes, you can, and you will. You earned it. If you hadn't told us what to do, we never would have been able to take that house full of MZBs, and we still want you to come out and work with some of our guys. Rob was smiling from ear to ear. You just tell me when, man. I always wanted a big hog, but I couldn't afford it on my salary. It was always cheapo rice burners for me. Thanks. You're welcome, and Jim picked up some weapons for you, too. They walked over to Jim's truck, and Jim handed Rob an AR-15 and a Kimber custom shop pistol in .45 caliber. Rob thanked the men again as they left. They drove over to Floresville Pump and Supply. The drive over to Floresville Pump and Supply was a short one. The men parked in front of the building, and Jim walked to the house directly behind the shop. A minute later, he came back with a pudgy, middle-aged man who had apparently not shaved since the burst. Jim introduced the man to Mark. Mark Turner, Leo Schmidt. Glad to meet you, Mr. Turner. Please call me Mark, and I'm glad to meet you, too. Jim told me that you had a fiberglass tank you'd be willing to trade for an SKS rifle and 500 rounds of ammo. I think we can agree to that, Mark said with a smile. Leo rubbed his chin. I've been thinking, and I'm going to need a little more than that. After all, this is the only tank for sale in the county. What did you have in mind? Mark wasn't smiling now. I've heard about you all from Silver Hills, and you have lots of guns, so I would think you could spare an AR-15, 10 magazines, and 2,000 rounds of ammo, or we could trade for $150 face and silver. Mr. Schmidt, that wasn't the deal you made with Jim on Saturday. We didn't make a deal, we just talked prices. Now the price is higher. Do you want the tank or not? The man said it emphatically. Mark started to get mad. He would like to tell this guy where he could stick his water tank, but that wouldn't solve anything. They really did need the tank. Mark took a breath and painted on his best smile. We'd like to have the tank, but we don't really need it. I'm sorry, the price you're asking is just too steep. Mark turned his head and spoke to his companions. Maybe the windmill dealer in Kennedy will have one. He turned back to Leo and extended his hand. Sorry to have wasted your time, Mr. Schmidt. Wait a minute, Leo blurted nervously. We can talk about it, can't we? Maybe I could reduce the price a little. What if I came down 1,000 rounds of ammo? How does that sound? I don't have all day to dicker with you, Leo. Mark's voice was forceful, but not unfriendly. I'll give you an SKS and 1,000 rounds. Take it or leave it. I can't take that. I need at least... Mark wheeled around and took a step toward the door. He motioned with his head that Jim, Ralph, and Gunny should follow him. Okay, I'll take it, Leo said. Mark turned back around and shook the man's hand. They gave Leo the rifle and ammo and loaded the tank on the trailer and headed home.